All right, welcome back to the JFK Assassination Audit number 58. It is now, 26 January. Let me write this down here, 58. 26 January. All right, and we're going to get back into this with Wesley Frazier through this crazy, ridiculous, boring testimony. Like I said, there's this huge warehouse full of crap called the Warren Commission Report and their investigation. And what we're doing is we're going through with a little rake and a little shovel, and we're looking for those diamonds. Okay? All right, so here we go. It says, but the lunchroom is on the second floor. Right. Do they sell food there? No, sir, they don't. About all they sell in the lunchroom is different types of soft drinks. And then near the window, the me who work in the office they have coffee there. You can drink coffee up there. I never did. Then you have an assortment of cookies and candies and peanuts and so forth in the machines there. That's about all they have. Do you remember whether or not Oswald packed his lunch, brought his lunch on other days, the days he didn't ride with you? To be frank with you, I don't know whether he brought his lunch, because I will tell you one way. Some guys bring their lunch there, and some guys buy it because they have a catering service, comes around about 10 o'clock. The man comes around, and several of the boys, they go there and they buy their lunch for the catering service. Then later at 11:45, 12 o'clock is when we always eat lunch. 12 to 12:45, right. When you get off your job, did you usually go to the lunch room or the second floor to eat your lunch? No, sir. Most of the time I don't. Most of the time you see several of us guys sitting down at our own table, and we just sit there. I say we usually go up there to get something to drink, and I say I have ate up there several times, but most of the times I eat with the guys I work with. Usually we just sit down and eat. We lay down on the big tables there and sometimes talk or go to sleep. On the first floor, right. So what he's talking about, there's a big, huge table that they put the orders together, and he's talking about they either eat lunch there or take a nap or something like that. So basically, this is still racist Dallas, okay? So most of the black guys aren't allowed upstairs on the second floor lunchroom, and some of the white people are, but again, not just being racist, is also elitist, so a lot of the working class people don't go to the lunchroom there. Did you notice where Oswald had his lunch usually? No, sir, I didn't. Now I say we have a refrigerator there. Some of the boys put their lunches in there. Did you ever eat lunch with Oswald? No, sir, I never have. Did you ever see him eating lunch? No, sir, I never have seen him eat lunch. I have seen him go to the Dr. Pepper machine by the refrigerator and get a Dr. Pepper, but I never have seen him, you might say, sit right down and eat his lunch. That's interesting. So, if Oswald is not eating on the second floor, he's probably eating in the domino room. And that means that Wesley is either eating in the domino room or he's eating on that table he's talking about. So it doesn't make any sense to say he never saw him. Anyway, in driving back and forth with Oswald, did you ever hear him? Did he ever talk about guns? No, he never did. Did he ever tell you he owned a gun? No, sir. Did Oswald ever say anything to you about buying an automobile in any of these trips? One time we were talking about it, and he said he thought he would just buy him an old car, like mine. I say most models like that you can get them pretty cheap, and as far as going back and forth for work, that is about all they're good for. I said you don't need a new car to be used for going back and forth. You don't need it unless you drive a good sized distance. But that is what they said. In the long run he planned to buy one, but so far as I know he never did. Did he ever say that once or more than once? No, sir, just one time. All right. When he said he would buy an old car, yes. Did he ever tell you he had gone to an old car dealer? No, sir. Did he ever tell you that he had tried out a car? No, sir. So far as like I say, that one time, that as far as I can recall, that we ever talked much about anything about cars, except a while ago, he asked me, we were talking about the clutch and the automatic transmission and so forth. There was a bus service between Dallas and Irving? Yes, there is. Can you get the bus anywhere near the Texas School Book Depository? To be frank with you, I will say I've never ridden the bus from Irving over there, but I assume that you can get off there just like any bus in any street corner you want to. Do you know what the fare is? No, sir, I don't. Is there a toll charge to call Dallas to Irving? No, sir, it's not. For 10 cents you can call there, can you? Well, I say just your regular telephone bill, you just pick it up and you call. I see. Now, there was one date that Oslo came to you and asked you to drive him back to Irving. It was not a Friday, was it? No, sir, it wasn't. It was on a Thursday, right? Was that the 21st of November? Yes, sir. Well, tell me about that. Well, I say we were standing, like I said, 4-head table, about half as large as this, not quite half as large. But anyway, I was standing there getting the orders in, and he said, could I ride home with you this afternoon? And I said, sure. You know, like I told you, you can go home with me at any time you want to. Like I say, anytime you want to go over and see your wife, that's all right with me. So automatically I knew it wasn't Friday. I come to think it wasn't Friday, and I said, why are you going home today? And he says, I'm going home to get some curtain rods, he said. You know, put in an apartment. He wanted to hang up some curtains, and he said, very well. And I never thought about it, and I had some invoices in my hands for some orders, and I walked off and started filling the orders. This was on what floor? This was on the first floor. And what time in the morning? I would say about 8:10, because I go to work at 8, and I would break at 10. Was it at the break time or before? It was before the break. It was before noon then? Yes, sir. Did you see him at the noon hour that day? That day. I don't recall, to be frank with you. You know, I will just be frank with you. I say, like all the other guys worked there for a while, and he comes by and he walks by you. You don't pay so much attention, but say anybody else comes in strange, you automatically just look at them. Did you talk to him again until quitting time? Well, to be frank with you, like I said, the only time like I say, oh my God, he didn't talk very much, and about the only other time that I told you about talking them babies and the weather. Wow, they're only talking about babies and weather. Sometimes he would ask me some questions about a book, because down there, I say, if you have ever acquainted with books, a lot of times maybe just a little bit of difference in a title or something like that would make a difference in what type of book they want, and sometimes maybe they'll forget to put that on there and look at the price. If you can tell the price, some editions we have paperback and some have artbound, and the price can automatically tell you which one they want. And sometimes he would ask something like that, which book do you want? And I would tell him, and that was about the only conversation he had. You didn't talk any more with him that day concerning the ride home? Right. But you did go home with him. That is, he rode home with me. What time did you get off work? 4:40. What time did you get to Irving? You know, it's interesting that he knows exactly what time he got off. 4:40 instead of 4:45. But he doesn't know all this other stuff. Anyway, what time did you get to Irving? Well, usually we get there, if you make a good time, you get there maybe 5:20 or 5:25. But if you catch traffic and catching the train tracks, it usually takes about 5:30. It is just according to how bad the traffic is. That's interesting. It takes a lot longer to get home than it does to get to work, is what he's saying, because He leaves at 7:25 and gets there about 5 till about 7:55, so about 30 minutes. But this one, it takes, let's see, 30, 40, 45 minutes to get home. Did you make any stop in the car before you got home? No, sir, I don't believe we did. Did the two of you walk together down to the parking lot? Yes, sir, we did. And you dropped him off at the place where his wife was staying, did you? Yes, sir, I believe I did. To be frank with you, I say sometimes he rode with me and sometimes a little store not too far from the house there, and it was going to the store, I would just drop him off by the house. But if I wasn't going to the store, he would usually go to the corner near the house and walk the rest of the way to the house up to where his wife was staying, just about half a block from my house up to where the wife was staying, so he would walk there just a little bit. Do you remember if you talked to him any of the walk down 2 or 3 blocks down the parking lot, anything said that you can remember? Wow. God Almighty. Like I said, now Mr. Judge Waring is pouring gasoline over his body and attempting to light the match. No, sir, I don't believe so. When you go in the car and went home, do you remember if you said anything to him, or if he said anything to you? No, sir, I don't believe he did. Like I said, he didn't talk very much. About the only time we would talk was about the weather and babies. Something like that. Sure is raining a lot on them babies. Anyway, do you remember this day whether or not you let him walk to the house where the wife was staying? To be frank with you, I can't remember positively whether I let him off at the house or whether he got out where I live, just to be frank with you. You know where the houses is, don't you? Yes, sir. Where Mrs. Payne lives, right. How far is it from your house? Like I say, it's just about half a block up the street. It is on the same street, is it? Well, I say we live on the corner of Westbrook and 5th, and 5th runs up, you know, and I say they live on 5th. What direction does 5th run, east-west or north-south? It runs east-west. East-west, and you live on the corner of Westbrook and 5th. Oh, my God. At this moment, the entire committee is pouring gasoline on themselves, screaming to Mr. Ball to please wrap it up. Anyway, God Almighty. Mr. Ball must drink a lot before he comes to this job, because this would just drive me insane. Da 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 da. God Almighty. Right, and Payne's house is east and west of your house. It is west. It is west of your house, right. About half a block, right. On the same street, 5th Street, right. What side of the street do you live on, the north side or the south side of 5th Street? North side. What side of the street do Paynes live on? The north or the south side of 5th Street? Wow, I tell you one thing, Mr. Ball is really proficient at shoveling that shit and making that pile really larger and watching it grow. God Almighty. What side of the street do the Paynes live on? The north or the south side of 5th Street? North. Do you live on the north side? Right. So to walk from Mrs. Payne's house to your house, you walk east along the north side of 5th Street across Westbrook. Is that right? Now from the corner of Westbrook and 5th, you walk west on the same side of the street on the north side. On the north side. Right. From your house to Mrs. Payne's. Right. You walk west. And from Mrs. Payne's house to yours. Okay. Now, did you see Oswald any that night, the Thursday night? No, sir, I didn't. You brought him home? Next morning, what time did you get up? What time did you get up the next morning? I believe I got up around 6:30. That is the time I usually get up, right around 6:30 there. Always eat your breakfast before you go to work? Right. Do you remember the night before That is, after you got home that night, your sister asked you now, you how it happened that Oswald came home with you. Yes, I believe she did, or something. We got to talk about something and said I told her that he rode home with me and told her he said he was going to come home and pick up some curtain rods or something. And I usually don't talk much to my sister. Sometimes she is not there, and when I am in because she is either at the store or something like that. I am either when she comes in, as I say, I am playing with the little nieces, and we don't talk too much about work or something like that. This evening, do you remember, you did talk to her about the fact that Oswald had come home with you. I believe I did. Did you tell her what he had told you? Yes, sir, I believe. She said, why did he come home with you now? Well, he says he was going to get some curtain rods. God Almighty, this kind of shit would make you just. If there was this is why they didn't have a jury, because now the jury would all be hanging themselves from the rafters after listening to this mundane, fucking boring testimony. Yes, sir. I believe she said. Okay. The next morning you had breakfast about what time? Between 7 and 7:15. What is the time? That is the time I usually come to the breakfast table about 7. Breakfast table in the kitchen? Yes, sir. It is in the den. And the kitchen windows look out on what street? Westbrook or 5th? Westbrook. They look onto Westbrook? Right. There is a back door, is there, to the kitchen? Yes, sir, there is. I say, when we come in there, we have a double carport, more or less, type of garage. Is that on Westbrook? Yes, sir. The entrance to the garage there, more or less carport. Yes, the entrance is from Westbrook. As you were having breakfast, did your mother say anything to you about, well, I say, Oswald? I was sitting there eating my breakfast there. So sitting there, I usually talk to my nieces, you know. They have them cartoons on for a while, and we usually talk a little bit back and forth while eating breakfast, and I was finishing my coffee there, and my sister, you know, was working over there around, you know, the sink there, and she was fixing my lunch, so she was somewhere around over the cabinets, fixing the cabinets. My mother just happened to glance up and saw this man, you know, who was Lee, looking in the window for me, and she said, who is that? Wow. And I said, that is Lee. And naturally, he just walked around, and so he just walked around there on the carport right close to the door. So I told her I had to go, and I went in and brushed my teeth right quick and come through there, and I usually have my coat laying somewhere on the chair, and picked it up and put it on. And by the time my sister had my lunch, you know, in a sack and sitting over there on the washer where I picked it up there by the door, I just walked on and we got in the car. God. Now, did your sister say anything as you were having breakfast? No, she didn't say anything to me at all. She didn't say anything to you either about Oswald, or did she? No, sir. She didn't say. You know, when we looked up and I saw him, I knew who it was. You saw him? Right. What was he doing? He just looked through the kitchen window to see from there on the ground outside there. I say you don't have to be any height at all. You don't have to be too tall to be able to look in the kitchen window there. When your mother mentioned, who is that, you looked up and saw Lee Oswald in the window. I just saw him for a split second, and when I saw him, I guess he heard me say, well, it's time to go, and he walked down by the back door there. Representative Ford is now pouring gasoline all over himself and slitting his wrist. Anyway, Representative Ford, When he would go with you on Monday, any Monday, was this the same procedure for getting in contact with you? You mean coming in there and looking through the window? Yes. No, sir, it wasn't. I say this is the first time he had ever done that. I say most times I would usually call him, I was already out in the car fixing to go to the driveway there and, around to pick up, or if he would come down. But most times, once in a while, I picked him up at the house, and another time he was already come down the sidewalk to the house where I was fixing to pick him up, and usually picked him up around the corner. Representative Ford, did this different method of meeting you raise any questions in your mind? No, sir, it didn't. I just thought maybe, he just left a little bit early, but when I looked up and saw that the clock was, I knew I was the one who was running a little bit late, because as I say, I was sitting there eating breakfast and talking to the little nieces. It was later that I thought it was. So Oswald wants to make sure he doesn't miss his ride. Basically was what all that crap means. When you went out to the back door, where was Oswald? He was standing just a few feet there outside the back door there. He wasn't in the car? No, sir, he wasn't. Was he near the car? No, sir, he wasn't. I kept my car parked outside in the carport on the other side. He was just a few feet outside the back door when he came out. So, all right. So it's a little different than what his sister is saying. So basically, if you can put it together, his sister was at the kitchen window. She sees Oswald come up. He's got the package by one end, dragging it across the lawn. He goes over, puts the package in the car, and then he comes over to the window to see if Wesley Frazier is coming out. And then Wesley Frazier sees him at the window. So apparently that's what's going on there. God almighty. All right. Let's see. Did you walk together to the car? Yes, we did. And you got in one side and got in the other. I find it interesting that Mr. Ball and the whole committee spend a lot of time on just absolutely non-essential bullshit, but don't ask people, co-workers, if they saw Oswald with the package. Don't ask, people relevant questions in regards to convicting Oswald or anything like that. No one asked if they saw Oswald after the shooting or if they saw Oswald leave the building. Nobody. You're going to see this kind of got all this detail on nonsense, but on things like, did you see Oswald carrying a package? Did you see Oswald carrying a rifle? Did you see Oswald carry a package up to the 6th floor? Did you see Oswald over in the corner? Did you see Oswald after the shooting? Did you see Oswald leave the building? They don't ask questions like that. Very, very strange. Well, I said a couple of times, most of the time, he was usually walking down the sidewalk, and as I was driving out of the driveway, so therefore I didn't have to go up to the house there to pick him up. I usually picked him up around the corner because he was usually on the sidewalk and just stopped and picked him up. Were you later than usual that morning? No, sir, I don't believe we were, because we got to work on time. I say, when I looked at the clock after I glanced, he was a split second. I just turned around and looked at the clock to see what time it was, and it was right around 7:21. So it's interesting. He can remember the exact time that he looked at a clock, okay, but he can't remember other specific details, okay? So he remembers exactly 4:40 when he left on Thursday and exactly 7:21. I wouldn't even remember that shit. And then I went in and brushed my teeth real quick and running through the house, put on my coat, and we left. You both got in the car about the same time? Right, all right. When you got in the car, did you say anything to him, or did he say anything to you? God. Let's see, when I got in the car, I have kind of a habit of glancing over my shoulder, and so at that time I noticed there was a package laying in the back seat. I didn't pay too much attention, And I said, what's in the package, Lee? And he said, curtain rods. And I said, oh yes, you told me you was going to bring some today. That is the reason, the main reason he was going over there that Thursday afternoon when he was to bring back some curtain rods. So I didn't think any more about it when he told me about that. And again, you know, these are the things that make Oswald look guilty. I've seen pictures of his room and there are already curtains in there. Unless he was going to put curtains, you know, over the door or something. And there's no reason why Oswald couldn't go home on Friday and pick up the curtain rods and bring them back on Monday morning. Anyway. Alright, so we're going to stop there and continue with Des Moines Shield. Alright, so I wanted to say something about psychology and human reactions and the Warren Report. So I'm sure that if you just listen to me do 25 minutes of that right there, and that's just a small portion of Wesley Frazier's testimony, and that's just one of hundreds of cross-examinations and testimony, that you're kind of where I was joking about. You're bored, you're turning off, if you are still listening, you're turning off the video, you're pulling your hair out, you're pouring gasoline, you're wanting to pour gasoline on yourself and set yourself on fire. And the reason that you feel like that, from me reading that, is on purpose. It's a psychological game that the entire Warren Commission set up to do that on purpose. Not only are they trying to wear down the witness and confuse the witness, they know that eventually these transcripts are going to be read by people that don't believe that Oswald did it himself. Okay? This is the different level of thinking that I'm talking about. These people are thinking on a much higher, different level than we are. Okay? And they know that listening just to that 25 minutes right there, or reading that 25 minutes of testimony, would be too much for most people. Much less going through hundreds of pages and hundreds of interviews like that. Okay? That's how they're able to blunt, okay, any kind of digging into what they did or didn't investigate. It's a psychological game they're playing to basically make people give up. Okay? You've got this long 1,000-mile hike or march that's called the Warren Commission Testimony and Research and Investigation. And their whole purpose is to wear people out in the first few miles so they don't go through everything. Okay? So again, this is a psychological aspect of the Warren Commission that's way above different levels. They thought about this, they did this, they planned this ahead of time. Okay? This is to eliminate any type of opposition delving into the Warren Commission report too deeply, because after a while you just lose your mind, you lose your life. It's like you're in a car and you're driving for 24 hours down the road, okay, and in the beginning you're alert, but after a while that little reptilian automatic brain takes over and you're driving automatic like a robot. By the 24th hour, you're not going to notice things that you pass by that you normally would have noticed in the very first hours. So not only are they trying to wear you out to make you give up, they're also, if you're willing to push on, your senses are going to dull. Okay, this is why I'm doing this in a little 25-minute spots here, because after about 25 minutes, psychologists say that most humans, their attention span drops off. This is why you have 30-minute, 25-minute shows, okay? And this is what's going on, the whole psychology of that. So that's why I'm doing that, and you can see 25 minutes is almost too much, okay? But there's a whole psychological purpose is to blunt any kind of in-depth research into this by one person. So the best way to do this is to have a group of people, okay? And they're all trained to look for certain things. Maybe have 100 people or 50 people. And you break up the whole Warren report and have them read their sections, and as they read their sections, they're looking for diamonds, okay? What we're doing is just going bulldozer like through the whole pile of shit, okay, which will wear you down. It's wearing me down. This is why I can only do it about 25 minutes. I got to go do something else, or I start to lose focus, okay, and you miss things. That's exactly what I said. If you go more than 25 minutes, you're going to miss little details because your brain and its senses start to shut down. All right, so we're going to go back into Des Moines Shield, and we'll do 25 minutes of that. And believe me, this 25 minutes I've worked out. I've done a lot of research on it. You can study on it. It's usually 15 to 25 minutes. It's about 15 minutes for the average person, the average IQ. When you get people like me that have a little higher IQ and a little more education, you know, you can push it up to about 25 minutes. But even the brightest Harvard scholar would start to fall asleep after 25 minutes, okay? Anyway, so we'll get back into this, and we're going to listen to some of Des Moines Shield.
For the permit for Marina to leave. I also recall something Marina telling us, that she was discharged from Komsomol. Komsomol is the organization of youth, communist youth, where practically everybody has to belong. And she was discharged from this organization because she married Lee. And she wasn't too worried about it.
It also could be part of her cover to cut down on anybody thinking that she's part of the Communist Party. And that's part of building her legend that, you know, she's this free-thinking, independent person and not associated with the Communist Party or their security intelligence apparatus.
Don't skip too much because
This is from the position.
Material, George.
I remember.
But why don't you read this?
Yeah, this is my position.
So, makes no difference.
Yeah. I very often people ask me why I, supposedly a man with education and an extremely wide experience and acquaintanceship all over the world, got acquainted with Lee and got interested in him. Well, I said always that it is because of his straightforward personality, of his experience in Soviet Russia, and the fact.
And here's how you can tell that the Des Moines Shield is an intelligence asset as opposed to an intelligence handler, okay? Because a handler is going to have a hook in Oswald, either money or something to control him, okay? And not really going to care about Oswald. He's going to pretend to care about Oswald, but not really give a damn whether Oswald lives or dies, okay? An asset is someone that's sent out. See, so that function there of the intelligence handler is to manipulate to handle, to like a catalyst to get the person, their asset, to function in a certain way, to do something for them or for the group they're working for. Okay, whether you're an FBI or whether you're a CIA or you're some kind of right-wing John Birch Society type group. Okay, you're trying to manipulate Oswald into doing things. Okay, whereas George de Mohrenschildt is just an observer, a friend, things like that. He's not trying to manipulate Oswald into doing things. This is why I'm completely against and just laugh when people said that George de Mohrenschildt was the person involved in getting Oswald to shoot Kennedy. It's so laughable because it's not in de Mohrenschildt's personality to be a manipulator. He's an observer. He reports back what he sees, okay? He's not a catalyst, he's a scientist. He's an observer. He's sitting there watching and reporting what he observes, okay? And then also, like I said, it's just a joke to say that de Mohrenschildt, and like in this movie, this 11/22/63, they try to make out de Mohrenschildt as being, you know, a handler for Oswald, and he's sitting there in the backyard when Oswald's taking photos. He's taking him to John Birch Society meetings. That didn't happen. And another thing, if Oswald is being handled by de Mohrenschildt, why would de Mohrenschildt go to Haiti? You can't handle someone from Haiti, especially back then. There's no internet. All you have is a phone. Oswald's too poor to have even a phone. Okay? So, to think that de Mohrenschildt, okay, was a handler like a Maurice Bishop or an Angleton like that is just laughable. Okay? He's just an observer, an asset that reports back to his handler. Okay? Anyway. There's a big difference, and people seem to mix up and don't understand the subtleties in those differences. Okay? Alright, we'll keep going.
The fact that he lived in Minsk. And it never occurred that, in my mind, that Harvey Lee Oswald was an agent of any other country. He was too outspoken in his ideas and his attitudes. If he were an agent, I think he would have kept quiet. Of course, he wasn't an uneducated fellow, but he tried to improve his education by reading, by studying. His opinions were sincere, even though...
So you see did you hear what he just said? Okay. He just explained what Oswald's roles were right there. Okay. So when de Mohrenschildt knew him, Oswald wasn't an asset of anyone. He wasn't being handled by anyone. Okay. Because he was too outspoken. He gave his opinions. I'm sure we're going to read testimony of his co-workers at Jaeger Childs, and I'm sure it's going to be completely different than what it was at the Texas School Book Depository. And you see, did you hear what he said? That if he was an agent, he would have kept quiet. So what does Oswald do? He goes from this outspoken Marxist socialist communist to this very quiet person, only talking about babies and the weather, okay, with Frazier, and not talking to anyone. He's very quiet at work. So that tells you that Oswald is an agent then. By the time he's gone to New Orleans, he's been given a mission not to kill Kennedy. It's something else. They've told him, they've lied to him. His handlers, Bannister, Ferry, whatever, have lied to him, put him on a mission, okay? Maybe he thinks he's working with the right-wing groups to infiltrate them. Maybe he thinks something, some kind of agent, some kind of mission, okay? And so Oswald, you see him as a soldier in New Orleans, he's standing there at attention in that photo, taking one for the team, and then he goes back to Dallas, he's completely different. You know, why live separately from your wife, okay, if you're not on some kind of mission and she's too nosy and you want to keep her at bay, to keep her out of your mission? So he just told you right there what Oswald was doing before and now what he's doing in Dallas.
A little bit crude. He picked up quite a few difficult words from the books he had read, and these words he liked to display a great deal. Sometimes we laughed with him about the use of those long, difficult words. Let me say something that both my wife and I had an element of pity, and for this forlorn individual who was groping for something, trying to find the truth. And speaking about the fact that whether Lee might have been an agent of any country, I would say that I never believed that any government would be stupid enough to trust Lee with anything of importance. Even the government of an African country would not give him any job of any type of confidence, because he was too outspoken. He had a certain element of instability. As I said before, he switched the countries, but he did it, I think, for the enjoyment of adventure.
So you hear what he's saying, right? So this is the reason why de Mohrenschildt eventually kills himself. Right here. Okay? He didn't believe that Oswald would be an agent, could be used as an agent by any country. So he's reporting back because he's too unstable. He's too outspoken. Okay? So what we're talking about is the period from, say, he's reporting back on Oswald from like September of 1962 till about May, end of May, or beginning of May, or end of April 1963. Okay? So at that time, no one knows they're going to kill Kennedy in Dallas. In May of 1963, nobody knows they're going to kill Kennedy in Dallas. Okay? They're formulating a plan, especially after the Cuban Missile Crisis. Then the military is on board. Before that, you had a bunch of raging anti-Castro Cubans. You had their trainers and mercenaries at Interpen. They were all, let's kill that son of a bitch Kennedy. You had some racist people. You had maybe some oil people on, involved, but it's all talk. Okay? What really clicks in is after the Cuban Missile Crisis. This is my supposition. With the CIA and the military realizing that Kennedy is shutting down the anti-Castro forces, he's cutting them off and having the FBI go after them. He's not going to go into Vietnam, which the military wants to get heavily involved in. He's pushing for this nuclear test ban treaty. He's talking about going to the moon with the Russians. He's talking about negotiating with the Russians. This is just too... And then he doesn't go into Cuba, and that was the last straw. We're at the brink of nuclear war. The military is ready to go into Cuba and invade, and he puts in this embargo and embarrasses them and ends that. So that is the final catalyst, I believe, that the military and the CIA finally came on board. So you can see it like this. You have all these different groups. So you got the racists in the John Birch Society, hanging around Walker, the anti-segregationists or the segregationists, they didn't like Kennedy from the beginning, okay? And then after the Bay of Pigs, you have the anti-Castro Cubans. They're not too hot about Kennedy after that. Then on top of them, you got the white mercenaries, the right-wing mercenaries with Interpen. They're joining up with them, and there's talk in 61, 62. And then you've got the CIA, you've got the CIA and Mafia, I believe, sort of come in when Kennedy starts shutting down the anti-Castro groups. Starts cutting their funding and starts having the FBI go after them. That's when the CIA or right-wing elements of the CIA and the Mafia start to turn and try to figure some way to get Kennedy, but he's too big to bust. You've got the FBI who was constantly butting heads with Robert Kennedy, and you've got, the butting heads with John Kennedy. I think what the catalyst was, the final straw, was the Bay of Pigs. The Cuban Missile Crisis in October of 1962. The military was expecting to go in to take out Cuba, to take out those missiles. It didn't happen because of the embargo. Khrushchev took out the missiles, but left a lot of nuclear warheads, suitcase nukes, all these kinds of tactical weapons. The military thought that was just too much, and that's when they came on board, the right-wing elements of the military. And like I said, we're talking about groups within organizations, not the entire organization, okay? So that's when they came on board. And then from there, they started looking for somebody. So you can have a plan to kill someone all you want, the desire to kill someone all day. But if you don't have a place, a time, and someone to do it, and someone to pin it on, you've got nothing. Okay? So they can find a place, not easily, but they can figure it out. They can move the chess pieces to the place. Once they have the place, they know they can create their own time. Okay? All they need is the chess piece, the assassins, and the person to blame it on and to pin it on. Okay? They've got in there mafia people, this Interpen white mercenary group. They can be the assassins. So you've got the place you're looking for, the time you're looking for, you've got the assassins, and you're looking for someone to pin it on. So what you see is there's several patsies that are chosen. A lot we don't even know about. But you got this guy in Chicago. There was obviously somebody they had picked in Miami and Tampa. There was even, I understand, some kind of plot for D.C. Okay. But I think once you got Johnson on board, because Johnson became aware of the plot somewhere in the spring around this time, I believe. And then that's when you see Connally come in and get Kennedy in the summer of 1963, have some kind of fundraiser in the South. Okay? And then they iron it out later. You see Oswald, he's moved like a chess piece. Okay? So they know that Oswald is going to be one of the targets, one of the patsies. So they move him in May down to New Orleans to get him away from Dallas, okay, near some people that can control him better than de Mohrenschildt. And then, as things start to meld, see, this is the thing you have to have in operations is flexibility. You have an end result here, and then you have these different elements. You've got a place, Dallas, Chicago, Miami, Tampa, Washington, D.C. You've got a time, sometime in the spring or sometime in the fall. You've got the group to carry out the assassination. Some of these members of the Interpren, some of the Cubans, maybe some mafia. Then you need a patsy. You got the guy in Chicago. I'm sure there was someone else in Miami and Tampa that they were setting up. Because you see these groups moving back and forth between Miami and Dallas and New Orleans. So it's somewhere. It's going to be in here somewhere. They figured it out. Dallas, New Orleans, Miami, Tampa. So you keep pushing and seeing where all these pieces are going to land. Because right now you have your goal, but you don't know exactly what's going to happen. Okay? So you're pushing all these elements forward, and they find through the Mornshield they got Oswald. This is why Oswald gets transferred down to New Orleans. Okay? De Mornshield realized that his reports that he had been writing back about Oswald were being used for his Oswald selection. Okay, I'm sure if you look, we're going to look at the other guy in Chicago. I'm sure there was a De Mornshield involved with him somewhere, some way, somehow. I'm sure if we dug deep enough into Tampa or Miami, you'd really only need one guy there in Florida somewhere. There's a Oswald running around in Miami, probably ex-military, somewhere there. Okay? Somewhere there. That's why De Mornshield killed himself, because he eventually realized that it was his reports that helped with the selection of Oswald, and he was part of it, and he was used, because this is the difference between an asset and a handler. Okay? An asset is used by a handler and just reports back what he sees. He has no control, or very little control, over what he's observing. An handler is like an enzyme. He gets his assets to motivate, to activate, to move and do things. A handler's not going to kill himself, okay? Maurice Bishop's not going to kill himself. Howard Hunt's not going to kill himself. There's no guilt. To be a handler, you have to be ice cold in the veins, okay? So that's what De Mornshield killed himself. That's why he realized this is what happened. His wife divorced him. Joan right there, she divorced him because there's those late night conversations when they get back from Haiti. You mean all this time you were sending back these fucking reports, you didn't realize they were setting up Oswald? How could you have been so fucking stupid? And we have to be, then De Mornshield's, well, we have to be quiet because these same people are out there and they could kill us. They're probably listening to our phone calls anyway. This is why he mentions they believe their phone calls are being recorded. Anyway, so we're going to move on. But that's the difference. Just remember, an asset has no control or very little control over what he's observing. He's just reporting back. Marina is an asset. The Pains are an asset. A handler is going to have control and move those assets like chess pieces to get them to do certain things. And it's always going to have a hook in the asset, okay? I'm sure De Mornshield's handler had some kind of hook in him, whether it's financial or deals or maybe some kind of blackmail, something. All right, so we're going to keep moving on. All right, so we're going into criminal procedural due process and how Oswald was denied all of this. Okay. All right, in criminal cases, many of these due process protections overlap the procedural protections provided by the 8th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which guarantees reliable procedures that protect innocent people from being executed, which would be an obvious example of cruel and unusual punishment. You know, even in the South, in slavery, slaves weren't allowed to just be arbitrarily executed. There had to be a process, okay, of a criminal process for slaves to be denied their right to live, and therefore they could be executed by the state. So even as property, okay, they had due process, where Oswald wasn't even allowed the same due process as a slave. Okay? An example of criminal due process rights is the case Vidic versus Jones, 1980. The Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment requires certain procedural protections for state prisoners who may be transferred involuntarily to a state mental hospital for treatment for a mental disease or defect. Such protections include written notice of the transfer, an adversary hearing before an independent decision maker, written findings, and effective and timely notice of such rights, and as established by the District Court and upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court in Vidic versus Jones. These due process procedures include. So, in this case, even a prisoner of the state in a penitentiary that has a mental disease or defect or mental illness is allowed due process, and not just arbitrarily, the warden decides to put him in a mental institution because he thinks he's mentally ill. So there's even a due process for the supposedly mentally diseased or mentally ill. And again, Oswald wasn't even afforded those rights of due process of the mentally ill. Anyway, it says, 1. Written notice to the prisoner that a transfer to a mental hospital is being considered. Oswald wasn't even allowed a written notice to let him know he was being transferred to another jail. A hearing, sufficiently after the notice to permit the prisoner to prepare, at which disclosed to the prisoner is made of evidence being relied upon for transfer, at which an opportunity to be heard in person and to present documentary evidence is given. Oswald wasn't even allowed in front of a judge to present any kind of evidence showing that he shouldn't even be charged and shouldn't even be under arrest. He had no attorney to do that. He wasn't given that opportunity at all. Number 3, an opportunity at the hearing to present testimony witnesses by defense and to confront and cross-examine witnesses called by the state, except upon finding not arbitrarily made of good cause for not permitting such presentation, confrontation, or cross-examination. Again, the Warren Commission was allowed to present its entire case of prosecution before the jury, the American people, and Oswald. No one ever was allowed to even enter. I mean, it's not like the Warren Commission didn't allow Oswald to have a defense. They completely stopped any kind of defense. So there wasn't even a rebuttal or written rebuttal allowed into the Warren report of any of the. Not only did Oswald his attorney not get an attorney, but the attorney wasn't, if he had an attorney, wasn't allowed to question the witness, wasn't allowed to examine the evidence, wasn't allowed to even put in a rebuttal of the witnesses or the evidence into the Warren Commission report. So you have a complete kangaroo Chinese communist type trial for Oswald in the public, and he's completely denied any kind of rights of cross-examination, confrontation, or defense. An independent decision maker. Well, Judge Warren wasn't an independent decision maker, even though they tried to make it look like it. Okay? There was no questioning of the prosecution involved, or any kind of, legal proceedings to prevent the prosecution from presenting some kind of evidence or witness. It was a kangaroo court. Matter of fact, as you see, some of the jurors, like Ford and, Dulles participated in the questioning of the witnesses. Anyway, a written statement by the fact finder as to the evidence relied on and the reasons for transferring the inmate. Well, we didn't even get to that part. Oswald was gunned down and murdered before he even got a chance to get any of that. Availability of legal counsel furnished by the state. If the inmate is financially unable to furnish his own, a majority of justice rejected this right to state-furnished counsel. That's interesting. So, even a mentally ill person would be allowed legal counsel, although there's the debate there on whether the state should be paying for that if he's, already been convicted and put in jail. But anyway, regardless of that, Oswald wasn't even allowed for his family to seek counsel or get a lawyer to him. Effective and timely notice of all foregoing rights. All right, so now we're going to get into the really meat of civil rights and how it affected Oswald, and it's the United States Bill of Rights. Now, again, when they first did this, there was no Bill of Rights, okay? And that was actually added on about 2 years later, and because it was pushed by the radicals, James Madison, Jefferson, things like that, because there were deficient. I will just read it right here. James Madison, who studied the deficiencies of the Constitution pointed out by all anti-federalists, and then crafted a series of creative proposals. Congress approved 12 articles of the amendment on September 25th, 1789, and submitted them to the states for ratification. Contrary to Madison's proposals, that proposed amendments be incorporated into the main body of the Constitution, they were proposed as supplemental additions to it. So there you go. And again, these Bill of Rights doesn't just pop up out of the air. Okay, it comes from other state constitutions, and there, like the Virginia Declaration of Rights, goes back to the English Bill of Rights, and also all the way back to the Magna Carta. So in the Bill of Rights, we find the rights of the individuals, especially related to criminal cases involved in the Fourth Amendment. It says the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches, seizures, shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Now, a good lawyer, okay, could say that the searches of Mrs. Payne's garage and the boxes that Oswald had his possessions in, and his room that he was renting, okay, and his possessions in that room were illegally seized. That the warrant wasn't issued to him, okay, the warrant was issued to the owner of the house. And even though that property was inside the house of the owner, Mrs. Payne and the lady on Beckley Street, that the warrant didn't include the portion that Oswald was renting. So therefore, a good lawyer could actually have thrown out the pictures that were found at Mrs. Payne's house, a lot of other incriminating things that were found at Mrs. Payne's house, and also at the Beckley address. So a lot of that evidence would have been in contention, and if not been thrown out, would have at least been under protest, and the jury would have known about that if Oswald had been able to get a lawyer and have his day in court. And it talks right here about searches and seizures. We won't get into that too much. Hold on one second. And see, what I'm talking about is the exclusionary rule. Is a legal rule based on the constitutional law that prevents evidence collected or analyzed in violation of the defendant's constitutional rights from being used in a court of law. Okay? So, Some of the evidence obtained at Mrs. Payne's house were obtained with a warrant for to Mrs. Payne and her property. Okay, there's some contention and debate on whether Oswald's property inside of Mrs. Payne's garage would need a separate warrant. Okay, what the police should have done is, after Marina showed them where the Oswald's gun, the rifle, was supposedly wrapped up in the towel, and all of Oswald's other possessions, they should have gone to the court and obtained a separate warrant for Oswald's possessions inside Mrs. Payne's house. Okay? Because even though Oswald wasn't paying rent, they were living there. Okay? There's still a right of privacy in being secured in your persons that's inherent in the Constitution. Now, that's all up for debate. I'm sure this would have gone, all the way to the Supreme Court if Oswald had lived. Okay, but also the same thing in Mrs. The Beckley's house. Okay, Oswald's room was searched without a warrant. Anything obtained in there could have been up for grabs, saying that it wasn't, seized correctly. Okay, the another thing would be the paper wrapping over in the corner. There's absolutely no evidence that wrapper was there. It's just what the police were saying. There was no picture taken of that area. Okay, so that's another one that could be thrown out. Of course, all these things would be debatable. I'm sure in Texas it would have been allowed by their appeals court and Supreme Court. It would have gone all the way to the Supreme Court of the U.S. and decide that. But again, these are reasons why Oswald had to be killed. Okay, because all of these things were put up. There's no way that Oswald, could have gotten those. Could have gotten that thing there. Let's see. Hold on one second. Now, here's another one. Now, we've seen over the years the exclusionary rule and the fruit of the poisonous tree have been really trampled upon and suppressed. Okay, that even Supreme Court rulings are saying that, the police may have illegally trampled on the person's rights and obtained that evidence, but that evidence would have been obtained anyway legally, so therefore the police can still use that in the trial. Okay, but back in the 60s, especially because of Judge Warren, a lot of this evidence would have been thrown out. I don't know if you remember these, Dirty Harry movies and these other movies back in the 70s, where they blamed a lot of the crime on defendants being allowed to walk because cops did illegal things in obtaining evidence. And there's big, ever since, the Dirty Harry era and the 80s and the 90s, you've seen the courts, progressively stomp on the rights of the individuals and go with the police, even if the police are obtaining that evidence illegally or violating the rights of the individual. So we've seen this shift back to the red state mentality, I guess you could say, is away from individual rights of the Warren era back to the rights of the state and the people outweighing the rights of the individual. And you have this involved in the fruit of the poisonous tree, which is a legal metaphor used to describe evidence that is obtained illegally. The logic of the terminology is that if the source, the tree of the evidence or evidence itself is tainted, then anything gained the fruit from it is tainted as well. And this usually involves, police violence, police breaking in without a warrant and obtaining evidence, things like that. Okay. And it says such evidence is generally not admissible in court. For example, suppose a police officer obtained a key to a train station locker in the process of conducting a search of a home. He that was unconstitutional on the grounds that it violated the Fourth Amendment. Any evidence of a crime that came from the locker would most likely be excluded under the fruit of the poisonous tree legal doctrine. So you could apply that same doctrine, okay, that, yeah, the police got Mrs. Payne's permission to search the house. They also came back with a warrant to search her house, but they didn't have a warrant specifically to search Oswald's possessions in her house. So this is something that probably would have ended up going to the Supreme Court had Oswald lived. Let's see. The testimony of the witness who discovered through illegal means would not necessarily be excluded. However, due to the attenuation doctrine, that allows certain evidence obtained or testimony to be admitted in court if the link between the illegal police conduct and the resulting evidence of testimony is sufficiently attenuated. Now, back in the 60s, we've had all these legal fights that now they're starting to allow more of this illegally obtained evidence and testimony, okay, to be admitted in court. But back then, in Oswald's times, it most likely would not have been allowed, especially if it gone to the Supreme Court, where you have Justice Warren, okay, who's sitting on the Warren Commission, just unbelievable. He would have not allowed that evidence obtained illegally to be, and would have called for a new trial. Okay, in the fruit of the poisonous tree doctrine is an extension of the exclusionary rule, which, subject to some exceptions, prevents evidence obtained in the violation of the Fourth Amendment from being admitted in a criminal trial. Like the exclusionary rule, the fruit of the poisonous tree doctrine is intended to deter police from using illegal means to obtain evidence. So, for example, if the police are chasing a suspect, okay, they chase him into a house and they arrest him in the house, and the suspect was reaching but didn't touch. Well, let's say he opened a cabinet, and there inside the cabinet the suspect opened up was a gun or a knife that was later found out to be used in a crime that they connected him to, say a murder or something, okay? Well, the police, if they just got that weapon, okay, and took it in as evidence and didn't obtain a search warrant for the house, there would be a good case for his lawyer to have that weapon thrown out. Okay? So, any evidence that the police obtained from Mrs. Payne's garage and Oswald's room, if they didn't have a specific warrant for a judge and went before a judge and says, hey, we believe there's evidence in there to this crime, would have been thrown out, most likely. Okay? Anyway, it goes on. It says, the doctrine is subject to four main exceptions. The tainted evidence is admissible if it was discovered in part of the result of an independent, untainted source, or it would inevitably have been discovered despite the tainted source, or the chain of causation between the illegal action and the tainted evidence is too attenuated, or 4, if the search warrant was not found to be valid based on probable cause, but was executed by government agents in good faith. See, this is where they get away with shit. Okay? So they would argue that any evidence they used in a trial found in Oswald's or Mrs. Payne's garage or found in Oswald's room, the police could just say, hey, well, we didn't know Oswald was renting this room. We just knew that he lived here. Okay? We didn't know that Oswald wasn't staying at this residence, wasn't paying rent to Mrs. Payne. And then there would be a contention there too. If Oswald was paying rent, he would have more of a defense, okay, at Mrs. Payne. So if he was giving Mrs. Payne money to allow Marina to stay there, and there was some kind of written agreement or verbal agreement to allow her to stay there for X amount of dollars per month, he would have more of a defense. Okay? But the police could use the good faith argument in obtaining the evidence they obtained in Mrs. Payne's garage, because they didn't know the exact circumstances that they walked into, whether Oswald was living there, whether it was just his wife living there, whether his wife was living there for free, whether his wife was paying rent. They didn't know the circumstances, and Mrs. Payne allowed them to search the entire house and the garage. So there would have been all kinds of court cases stemming from this. They didn't want any of this, so that's why Oswald was killed. Very, very simple. Anyway, we're at the end of the time, and we'll pick this up tomorrow.